So laboratory exercise number 1 is all about measurements, because we need to do a lot of measuring in anatomy and physiology because we're trying to understand the body. We're trying to understand key aspects of how the body works. And in order to do that, we need data. To get data, you need to measure stuff. Okay, so in this lab, we're going to be practicing dimensional analysis and converting units. So I've pulled up some tables here. You can pull up these anywhere on the internet during the lab. Feel free to pull up some conversion tables as you're working through this assignment. Because we're going to be converting units of different types into each other to get a full picture of how measurements in the body work. So we can measure things in metric or in imperial, and we can make measurements of different types. So we can measure lengths, so the measurement of something from one end to the other. We can measure the mass of something. So mass is kind of like weight, so how heavy something is. We can also measure volume. So volume is the amount of space that something takes up, so the amount of physical space. We have relationships between the metric and imperial systems. In physiology and in science generally, we're going to be using the metric system. But if you have a basic ruler, you'll see that we have imperial or inches on there as well. And in day-to-day life, we often use the imperial system. So it's important to get a sort of mental sense of how these two systems relate to each other. So we can pull up charts for that as well. So in metric, we would measure length in kilometers, meters, centimeters. In imperial, we might measure in miles, yards, or inches. And these have specific relationships to each other. So the other thing to note here is that one of the really convenient things about the metric system is that it all works on powers of 10, right? So we're going to have a base unit for each of our types of measurement. So our base unit for length will be the meter. Our base unit for mass will be the gram. Our base unit for volume will be the liter. Okay, so we start here in the center of this chart that I have up on the left. And as we add prefixes to the words, so prefixes like kilo, like centi, we're going to multiply or divide our measurement as we do our conversions. So this is just a table. So a deciliter, we get 0.1, a deciliter, we multiply by 10, kilometer, this is 1,000 meters. Okay, so we're going to be using tables like this as we work through the lab to understand how we could measure things in different units. Okay, so I want to work through a quick example. This isn't from your packet, but you'll be doing similar problems. So this is an example of why we might want to be able to do these dimensional analyses and conversions. So if you're working in a clinic in the future and you need to give a patient some Tylenol, right? Say you want to give them 650 milligrams every 6 hours, but the pills you have are 345 milligrams in a pill. So you need to figure out how many pills. The pill here is a different type of unit. So when we're setting up problems in our real life or here in lab, what we're going to do is figure out what measurement we want at the end. And then we're just going to use basically conversion tables and information in the problem itself to get to that final unit of measurement. So in this case, we know we need to give 650 milligrams. So that's something we'd pull from our question. We know that one pill, we want the number of pills at the end, that's our final unit of measurement, is 325 milligrams. So we just multiply this across. So you do 650 divided by 325 and get 2 pills. So I bet you could have all done that already in your heads based on what you already know about how math works. But as these problems get more complex, we're still using this basic system. So we're still going to just be setting up basically a multiplication and division problem. So that's what we mean when we say dimensional analysis. This is partially based on the identity property. So you can multiply any measurement by something that's equal to 1. So here what we're looking at, when we divide by 325, really what we're doing here is multiplying by 1, because 1 pill and 325 milligrams are the same thing. And that's key to remember as we work through dimensional analysis in harder problems, that you can always multiply by 2 measurements that are exactly the same, because you're just multiplying by 1. So that'll change our units, but it won't change the actual amount that we're thinking about. Okay. We also want to get a picture of how our different types of measurements relate to each other. So we want to be able to relate length to volume and to mass. So to do this, we're going to set out a thought experiment. We're going to start out by constructing a cube. So we have our cube, and we can measure its sides. And let's say this cube is 10 centimeters on every side. So it's 10 centimeters wide, 10 centimeters long, and 10 centimeters tall. So if we have this cube, measures 10 centimeters on every side, something that I'm going to tell you, if you multiply this 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters, this actually can be converted to 1 liter of volume. So we could measure this in cubic centimeters. So we have 1,000 centimeters. 1,000 centimeters is going to be the same thing as a liter. So you can look up this information as well. But we're able to convert these length units to units of volume. So this will be key as we try to measure things with our rulers to figure out how much actual volume in space they take up. Okay, so 1,000 centimeters is 1 liter. So 1 cubic centimeter, if that we then divide using our whole table. So 1 liter, if we go down to 1 milliliter, 1 cubic centimeter, if instead of being 10 centimeters on every side, we had 1 centimeter, would actually be 1 milliliter. And you could set up that dimensional analysis problem yourselves to prove that that's true. But it is true, I'm telling you. Okay, now let's weigh this cube. So different materials have different densities, so there will be different relationships between volume and mass. But in physiology, what we're really talking about is stuff in water. Your body is mostly made up of water. So when we're making measurements about the body, that's our baseline assumption. So let's say this cube is made of water. So if we weigh this cube, a cool fact about it is that if we have a 1 liter cube, it's actually going to weigh a kilogram. So we have this 1-to-1 relationship between liters, our measurement of volume, so how much space it takes up, and kilograms, one of our measurements of mass. So this is a really important relationship because it means that we can convert based on how much space something takes. We can estimate the mass of something as well. So 1 liter equals 1 kilogram, and 1 kilogram equals 1,000 grams. It also follows, and you can set up the math for this yourself as well, but it's then true that 1 milliliter equals 1 gram. Okay. So this is a way we can relate volume to mass. Okay. So I'm going to run through one more problem with you. So say we're working somewhere and we have some patient. We need to give them 2,000 micrograms of a certain medication. We need to give it to them every 8 hours, but our medication comes in 4 milliliter vials. So we can see here that we have measurements of 2 different types. We have a measurement in mass, and we have a measurement in volume. So we're going to need to relate these 2 units. So we start out with information we have from the problem. So say we have our 2,000 micrograms. Now what we can do is we can multiply by 1. We know we're not going to need micrograms. So we're going to, we're trying to get to grams. So we're going to get out of micrograms. So we're going to multiply by the conversion between grams and micrograms, which we would look up in our table. And we know that 1 milliliter is the same as 1 gram because of this cool property of how our measurements of volume and mass pair up. So we can then get from our measurement in grams to a measurement in milliliters. And we're always crossing out units. If we see a unit on the top and that same unit on the bottom, you can just cross it out. It's not going to end up in your end point. So we crossed out our micrograms, which means we had a unit in grams. And now we're multiplying by 1 to get rid of our grams so that we have a unit in milliliters. And then finally, we know that we have our 4 milliliter vials. So we're dividing by 4. So we would be able then to find out if you do this math across. So essentially 2,000 divided by 1 million divided by 4 is going to give us 0.0005 vials. And I know I talked through that kind of fast, but you'll be working through problems like this in your packet to get some practice. Okay. So finally, usually we're not going to be talking about the whole vial of something or our whole measurement of volume being one single substance. Often we're going to be talking about the concentration of something in water. So we'll have some type of medication dissolved in some water. So we're also going to want to be able to think about concentration. So the concentration indicates the amount of substance present in some specific volume. And so sometimes you'll see concentration expressed in the mass of something in a volume. So telling you how many grams of your medication are in a liter, for example. Or you'll see concentration expressed as moles per substance of volume, which is the official way to measure this. So if you've taken chemistry, which hopefully you all have, you'll probably have been measuring things in moles. But when we're talking about working in practice, working in some type of a clinic, where we actually have to measure out medications or other things, it's not very practical to measure a powder or a pill in moles. So we'll often see this expressed in mass per volume. So that shouldn't surprise you when you see this in a different form of unit here. Okay, so finally, we're going to get started on those packets. So our goal is to form accurate mental images and mental pictures of what these different sizes and measurements look like in everyday life, because the human body is something that exists in everyday life. So we want to have a good sort of general sense of what the size of these things is, so that as we move forward in physiology and we start telling you the measurements of different parts of the body or things we can measure in the body, you have a good feeling of how big that is and what numbers are reasonable. Okay, so again, you can just pull up a table as you're working through this packet. And now I'm going to stop these slides and I'm going to move you into breakout rooms and you're going to just get to work.